Matt. One of the people the world saw burned alive by the bombing at the Gaza hospital was Shaban al-Dalu, a 19-year-old engineering student who was still attached to an IV drip recovering from a previous bombing. And his story kind of speaks to how this isn't just about one attack. A 19-year-old having to provide for his family, repeatedly displaced, brought to hunger, bombed twice in a matter of days. This is a year, and this isn't out of nowhere. So how many more patients burned alive by U.S. bombs?
We don't want to see any. No, we don't want to see any.
Well, I guess the U.S. has said, again and again, that no civilian loss is acceptable 10,000 deaths ago, 20,000 deaths ago, and yet it's continued. So how does this answer mean anything without a policy shift?
It is an incredibly difficult environment that Israel operates in. And I'll just make clear, the thing that question leaves out, as often happens, and I understand why, is the burden that Hamas bears. And not just the burden that Hamas bears by hiding behind humans and using humans as civilian shield, but the burden that Hamas bears in not coming back to the table to try to get to a ceasefire. So Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm. Hamas needs to stop hiding behind human shields. Both of those things can be true. Both of those things are true. And ultimately, the horrific human toll over the past year is why we continue to push to get to a ceasefire, why we want to see both sides agree to a ceasefire.
If Hamas...
Just to go back, you mentioned the video you were asked about, people burning in their tents, and you said that we had all seen that. Did the secretary see that video?
Yes, he did.
And what was his reaction?
His reaction was that it was horrifying.
Maybe just have a couple more on Gaza, then a couple on the West Bank. But, the Washington Post reported, I think yesterday, about the strike against Al-Aqsa Hospital in the middle of Gaza, striking the tents, burning people alive and so on. Now, Israel always says that there are militants, that we never know whether there were or not, but that seems to be a story that is repeated every day. The Gaza people wake up every day to another 100 people dead or something like this. Now, I asked you about this last week, and you said, no, we would never accept this being normalized, but in fact, it is being normalized.
It's not. What happened in that strike was horrifying. We understand the very difficult environment in which Israel operates, but the results of that strike were deeply disturbing. Mm-hmm. We all saw that video, and all know that it's horrifying to see people burned to death. And we have made clear our serious concerns about the matter directly to the government of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Is it horrifying enough to be considered a war crime?
So I cannot make that kind of assessment from here. As you know, Saeed, there's a process that we have to go through to assess the facts of the law when it comes to any individual determination.
Yeah, but this seems to be going on every day, day in and day out. And, on the ceasefire talks, Haaretz is reporting that Israel is saying no more talks, no more negotiations. Can you comment on that?
So I cannot confirm what's reported, I assume based on anonymous sources. We have continued to engage with the government of Israel to try and get a ceasefire over the line. As you have heard us say, that requires not just Israel, but Hamas making difficult decisions. And it continues to be the case that Hamas is not at the bargaining table in any kind of serious way to talk about how we get an agreement.
So you are still saying that if Hamas comes back to the table and they come up with, reasonable, whatever, stance and so on, talks will resume?
Of course they would. We are committed to a ceasefire agreement under the terms that the president laid out on May 31st and that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. Absolutely.
Now, Israel is going to seize the UN agency headquarters in Jerusalem. Do you have any comment on that and turn it into some sort of a settlement?
Yeah, so we have made clear that we have have made clear for some time that we believe the government of Israel's settlement program to be inconsistent with international law, and continue to make that clear to the government of Israel. West Bank than the one that they're pursuing now, not to mention in Gaza.
Thank you.
Thanks much. This is an idea as much as a military force. How is continuing to kill tens of thousands of people already suffering from pre-existing apartheid going to defeat that idea?
We have always made clear that you cannot defeat an idea through a military campaign. You can defeat Hamas's military wing, you can degrade Hamas's capabilities, but there has to be a political path forward for a future in Gaza without Hamas, and we've made that clear for the past year.
And then just to Humera's question earlier on the U.S. asking Israel for a new channel of communication about civilian harm, how has the U.S. and Israel been discussing civilian harm incidents up to this point, and why hasn't it taken a year and at least 42,000 people killed for the U.S. to consider that its approach for relying on Israel to stop hurting civilians is just insufficient?
We have long made clear that we want to see changes in their behavior. We haven't seen sufficient changes, and which is why we continue to press them. And with that, I'm going to wrap for today. Thanks, everyone.